Hello everyone, it's Infinity Gamer here, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about the mighty Morats. Jumping straight into it, the strengths of the Morats are a lot. I was trying to think of a better word, but I don't think I can. There's a lot going for the Morats, and in this video I'm going to outline exactly what that is, and a few things for you to watch out for if you're ever facing them, especially if you're facing them for the very first time. So for example, they have some great fire teams, they've got great warband options, they've got some very resilient units, they've got some very vicious combos. They're not just meatheads that are designed to like attack, ragey, which is, before I started playing them, that's exactly what I thought they were. But actually, the more and more I've played them, the more I've realized that actually there's a lot going for them. Okay, so jumping into a couple of special rules that you need to be wary of if you're playing the Morats. The first one is that they've got like a Garki, Praetor, Osnat fire team that even though the Garkis and the Praetors are irregular usually, there's a special rule that when they're in a fire team, those irregular troopers become regular. That's going to play a key part later as I go through some of the fire team compositions and things that you need to consider if you're playing them or if you're building their list. Watch out for that combination and that special rule that exists for there. The other special rule that you'll see within Morat fire teams is the Tarlok or Torlak fire team, and that's that everything in that fire team gets the jungle terrain rule. Doesn't apply heavily in a lot of the terrain sessions that we've got with the missions that are existing in ITS 14, but worth noting that that is a rule that happens, and it might catch you by surprise because it won't necessarily be on the courtesy sheet for those units, but it's definitely going to be there as part of it. So now that that's the special rules out of the way, shall we jump into a few things to watch out for? Okay, so one of the big things that you want to watch out for when you're playing Morats is that pretty much everything has Veteran. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Veteran and how it plays, the user is not affected by loss of lieutenant. So if they fall into loss of lieutenant state and they have Veteran, then they remain regular, which is quite niggly. The user isn't affected by retreat, and the user cannot be isolated. Now, when you're thinking about some of your conventional counters to heavy infantry and like a lot of that sort of stuff, like big hitters and multi-wound models, one of the first things you're going to think of is that actually isolating that troop is going to be a pretty key strategy. Can't do that with pretty much all of the Morats. A few of the things that don't have this are the remotes, obviously, and then there's like one or two like peripheral units, but the core things that you will find in most Morats lists all have Veteran, so that's going to be tricky to get around. One of the things that you will notice is that a Morat player isn't necessarily super secretive about their lieutenant. In most cases, it's going to be Kornak, and the reason for that will be explained later in this video. But you'll see a Kornak on the table, you'll know it's the lieutenant, and for a Morats player, it's just not going to mean the same as it does for other units and other factions, because you take out Kornak, there's very little loss of lieutenant and very little impact that's going to be felt by that Morats player. So hunting down the lieutenant in order to try and put the opponent in a less than desirable state, it's simply not going to work against the Morats player. Another thing you need to watch out for, as I've said, lieutenant. It's going to be Kornak in most cases, and the reason for that is that he is an exceptional lieutenant option. Brings 3 regular orders with him. Yep, that's right, 3 regular orders. That's because he's got a +1 lieutenant order, but also has strategist level 1. So for about 45 points, that's actually going to be a really good option to be taking, and it doesn't matter that it's a super obvious lieutenant because you've got Veteran pretty much across the board anyway. So the Morat player is likely to be taking Kornak and is probably going to be using it quite offensively and is not going to care if you take it out. So that's definitely something to watch out for. There are other lieutenant options. The Suryat, which is a great unit in its own right, that has a really good option there, which has, I think it's +1 lieutenant order, doesn't come with Strategos, so you're basically getting 2 lieutenant orders plus the regular order. That one I believe has Timbot too, so that is a good option. There are a couple of good NCO options that would complement that quite nicely. I think off the top of my head, there might be a Raicho profile that has NCO. The Bull Track, I think, has NCO, and then there's 1 or 2 regular orders. As you can tell, that's not the configuration I typically go with because I'm not super familiar with the NCO options. I'm a Cornac fan. I just take Cornac and then I take the regular orders thanks to Strategos and I use them as and when I need to, and I don't need to worry about saving them for an NCO option. So that's why I'm not super familiar with that. And if you're a Morats player, let me know what the other lieutenants are like. I haven't really used them. Units to watch out for. There's quite a few here and some of them may take you by surprise even though there's no real shenanigans at play with any of these. The first one I want to bring your attention to is the Yowgat. Now if you watch my Best Snipers in Infinity video, you'll be familiar with that name. It features in the top 5 of that list because of a couple of points. One of them is that it's very, very easy for you to get that into a pure 5-man core, thanks to the Morats keyword, which is something I'll talk about in a little bit too. Which means that you've got all the bonuses of a 5-man pure. You've got the +3 BS, you've got the extra burst. This unit has +1 burst on its multi-sniper rifle anyway, so that's a lot of shots raining down on you. With a unit that has MSV2, it's pretty good. That's definitely one to watch out for because it will often be left as an ARO piece and it's going to be tricky. I mean, in ARO is actually your best time to take it down because it's obviously got the reduced burst. But offensively, you just want to stay out of its way because it's going to tear through your army if you give it much option. The next unit that you need to be wary of is the Kaitok. This is personally one of my favorites. I take the MSV1 Foulback pretty much every time. However, the heavy rocket launcher version also looks pretty cool, and all of the profiles are good for different roles. So it very much depends on how you're going to be playing your faction as to which one you're likely to take, and I don't think there's a wrong option among them. For me, I'm taking a really big core that is good in ARO, it's good offensively, and the Kaitok sits really well alongside that. From a range band perspective, I like the Foulback 2 and obviously MSV1. Can't really go wrong with having lots of MSV, especially with the prevalence of smoke that exists within Morats. The Suryat is another unit that's definitely worth mentioning and one to watch out for. Again, there's a lot of things going for it and there's a few profiles, so you might see this in different flavors if you're playing against Morats, and all of them are pretty good options. The HMG one, very nice. I don't take it as often as I probably should because I get stuck on the heavy rocket launcher version. I just love it as an ARO piece. I love it offensively. That's also got MSV1 because I love stacking my deck with MSV1. AP immunity is just annoying for most people because they see the big armor 4 on this thing and they go, fantastic, I'll just hit it with some AP. Can't do that. So that's another thing to watch out for if you're trying to take out a Suryat. AP is not going to do the trick against it. It's good stack profile numbers, great heavy infantry without the heavy infantry flaws, because it's got excellent BTS and also comes with a tin bot flavor in a couple of those options. So again, I like to take this, use it quite offensively because all those things that I'd usually be worried about with my heavy infantry and especially a heavy rocket launcher, I don't have to worry about with the Suryat. The Tactical Awareness HMG, I think I've alluded to it already, with Timbot is a great profile, obviously giving you the extra order if you're going to be using it really aggressively. I use mine as more of an ARO piece, so that's why the heavy rocket launcher works well for me, but I think I really need to give this HMG version a run because it's going to be quite fun running around with that thing, and again, it's pretty brutal. Raicho, or Raicho, is still, I think it's Raicho, but call me out on it when I'm wrong. It's the pronunciation, it's not my strength anyway. I love this tag. I prefer it over the Bull Track over many circumstances, and I think because even though I'm paying slightly more, I feel like the Raicho comes with a lot more for those points versus the Bull Track. I do love the Bull Track model. I have one there, I do love it, and I use it as a proxy for my Raicho because I don't have one. But I think profile-wise, the Raicho just wins out. I often pay the full points for the Mine Dispenser version. It's rare that I actually get to use the Mine Dispenser because I'm generally using it quite offensively, but that's a good option for pinning down your opponent's mission specific and can work quite well. Has decent hacker protection with ECM hacker -3, which is pretty good, and obviously has guided -6. It's got BDS 6 and immunity to criticals is just ridiculous on a profile that's that big and that able to withstand a hit anyway. So that's definitely one to watch out for. The Raziat. Mixed opinions here as to whether it's a good unit or not. I fall very much into the camp of it's a good unit, and that's because every time I've used it and every time I haven't, it's factored into my games. It's got deployment zone parachutist, which means that anyone playing Morats has to worry about this coming in at their deployment zone and in their backline. Anything that can do that is a threat, whether it's in your list or not. because your opponent is having to defend more directions and more sides. So it's a very psychological profile there. And actually, when you look at the points and what it comes with, it's worth taking a few times in your missions. And again, mission specific, but definitely worth a go if you are a Morats player. It's got really good CC. Obviously, it can do well shooting, and even though that's like sort of its weakness, because it's going to have the ability to come on in the deployment zone and choose its line of fire and pick its targets, there's a likelihood that even though it's kind of not as good at shooting as it is in CC, that you're still going to be able to get things in their rear arc. They're not necessarily going to be able to defend as well. You're going to be able to choose your engagement. So that's fine. And then when things start to realize, or if you manage to do this quite effectively, CC is where this thing really shines. I believe off the top of my head it has Natural Born Warrior. It's definitely got martial arts, it's got a good CC. If you can get this into combat, it's going to be great fun. The Raziat is definitely one to watch out for. Then finally, the Rindak. This is not as amazing as all of the others. You know, I've definitely hit hard, but I think this is an underappreciated profile within the Morats setup, and I've definitely used it once or twice, and my opponent has gone, huh? Really? Are you sure that's the thing? So the thing that I play here is that the Rindak has +1 burst on its medikit, and it's a very good paramedic option anyway, and it's very low cost. 27 points is the cheapest version of the Rindak. But you can put it into a mixed Fireteam. I often put it in Harris if I'm feeling like it, which means that you've got a +1 burst medikit that you could potentially do, and I believe this is the case, another +1 burst on it when you're shooting the medikit. And so a burst 3 medikit is likely to work and get its target up and running again. And again, for very low points here. So the Rindak also has it's immune to crit, so you can see me checking my notes, immune to crit, it's got sensor, it's immune to shock, it's got dodge +3 and dodge -3, so obviously if it's doing something to an opponent, that's a nice little negative. It's got climbing plus and NWI, and all, as I said, all for 27 points. So this is one where I don't think as an opponent you're necessarily going to go, oh, that's going to come and, you know, attack me and it's going to be horrible, but it's going to be annoying if you can't put it down quickly and you're doing a great job of taking out the rest of the Morats force, and then this thing comes along and just goes 3 shots of a medikit over this way and 3 shots of a medikit over that way, and starts to revive things with relative ease, and also with its dodging and all of that, meaning it's relatively hard to kill. So those are the units I feel like you have to watch out for. There's a couple more that will get a mention, but only in the context of the compositions coming later. I want to talk about fire teams next, because there's a few things here, whether you're building Morats lists or whether you're playing against them, that you probably need to be aware of in some popular compositions that you're likely to face. So one of the special rules that I didn't mention at the beginning, because this is very situational to how someone's setting up their list, is that Morats can actually take 2 Harris or Haris, a nod of the cap to people who use that pronunciation. So they have 2 Harris Fireteam options, in that they can have a core and 2 Harrises, which already puts them into a slightly rarefied field. There's been a couple of instances when I've been building lists for other factions where I've gone, do you know what would be really handy? Is if I could have a second one of those when I'm building my Harris. Not a problem with Morats, and that's really good, because one of the Harris options you want to take, and one of the Harris options I feel like you need to take, and being able to not decide between which one you're going to go for your list building is so much fun, and one of the reasons why I've been loving playing Morats for the last year. So the ones that you want to think about here is the Garki special rule. So I generally run my second Harris as that Praetor Garki one that I did mention in the special rules. So with this one, if you take the Osnat FTO and you take either Garkis or Praetors, you can create a fire team, and those irregular Garkis and Praetors become regular. Now I purely use this as an order bank, but it's amazing how many times those spare Garkis and Praetors, and also the Osnat, have really helped me out, because you can just charge them up the field and they can cause absolute chaos. And the Osnat's great because I take the smoke grenade launcher, and it's just, again, really underutilized. And as a reserve offensive Harris that was also generating you a ton of orders, love that thing. So that's one of my Harrises that I like to build in, is that Garki Praetor one. The other Fireteam options, you've got 2 main ones that I look at. There's a couple of other options, but I don't see them as attractive as these 2. You've got the Tarlok, which I've mentioned because that's got the jungle special rule. And then you've got the Morat Fireteam. Now that's the main one, that's the core one. as far as I'm concerned, and that's the one I'm going to focus on a little bit now. So the Morat one is the best Fireteam option I have ever played. Now I appreciate that in comparison to a lot of people, I'm relatively new to the game and I haven't played a lot of factions. In fact, I've only really played O12 Star Armada, Military Orders, and now Morats, so very, very green in comparison to other players. However, out of all of those, this Morat Fireteam is so cool. So there's a couple of things here, and that is the fact that it is so easy to make a pure Fireteam because so many things have the Morat keyword. Not only does 90% of that Fireteam list have Morats in it, but then you look down at the wild cards and a few of those have Morats in there, which is excellent because you can bring them into a pure core Fireteam, and it's so easy to make a pure core Fireteam without having any things that miss the mark really. So for example, when I'm building a Morat pure core Fireteam, so a 5-man Fireteam, all with the Morat keyword, I'll generally look at Cornac and Anyat as my 2 wild cards. Now the reason for that is Cornac is a great lieutenant option, has the Morat keyword, so goes in there quite nicely, and also has that Mark 12 can actually be pretty useful, excellent BS, can actually be really good at shooting when everything else dies, which happens roughly turn 2. Anyat, a lovely option, don't use her T1 combi, again off the top of my head I think that's what it is, but the smoke can be really useful when you're advancing this Fireteam up. I then generally take the Morat, Vanguard Infantry Morat, but the paramedic flavor. Now I do that for 2 reasons, obviously because things are going to start dying and having a paramedic in that link is really useful, but also it gives me an additional specialist in there. Anyat is a specialist operative too, so that's 2 specialists that I have already and we're only at the 3rd member of the team. And then, no surprise, the other 2 that go in there is a Yaugat sniper, great for ARO and attacking, again through Anyat's smoke, and then the Kaitok with the fireback MSV1, just a nice heavy hitter, it can be quite intimidating, a couple of wounds, so it can be difficult to put down. So that 5-man pure core link is a roving army. It's great in ARO, it's great offensively, it can do objectives, it can keep itself alive. That is, for me, one of the best pure cores I've ever played with. And then I've still got other options here. So I've spoken about the other Harris that I did, the Garki Proto one, and that's mostly building up orders. Because when I go back to that pure core that I explained with all of those units that I've got in there, I've spent 156 points to create that. It's generating 7 orders thanks to Cornac being in there, but the range bands are also pretty good. Obviously the sniper goes up to huge distances, the foulback has a bit of crossover there, and then by the time we get to the foulback's bad aim, I've got like the K1 combi, not T1 combi, K1 combi of Anyat, got the combi rifle of the Morat Vanguard Infantry, and then I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what, and Cornac's Mark 12 then bridges the gap quite nicely and is generally what I'm using at those mid to short ranges. So yeah, really good there. And then I've got the Garki Praetors. I think I had the points there. This is not looking cool, I know, because here we go. So then talking about the Hungries, because so the Hungries aren't necessarily going to do a lot, but that pure core, that Morat pure core that I've just spoken about, when I've then got the Hungries Fireteam sitting there, I mean, some people take it as a 5-man core. The first time I saw it being played, it was actually being used as a 5-unit Fireteam. But I just felt that that was a waste of the bonuses that a pure core gets. And so that's why I generally run the Hungries Garki's Fireteam as a Harris, and then I run the Morat Fireteam as a 5-man because I want the +3 on the Yaugat and all of that sort of stuff. So this Hungries Garkis, I'm pointing to them like they're here, it's because that's where I've just played a game on this table and that's where they were deployed. So the Hungries Garkis Fireteam, what are we spending? We're spending 32 points to get 5 regular orders thanks to the irregulars. Oh no, sorry. Backtrack. To do it as a 5-man Fireteam, you're spending 32 points to get 5 regular orders. So that's definitely good as an order bank. I take the Harris, I spend 24 points and get 3 regular orders, which isn't as efficient, obviously, but I feel like that's a better use of then the buffs and the bonuses because I can still get that +1 burst that you get on the Harris. And if I'm taking a Praetor with a chain rifle or something like that, that's a nice way, or like the Osnat with the smoke grenade launcher and things. So still using the bonus where it's applicable, but then saving most of those buffs for the bigger units. The third Fireteam that's well worth mentioning is another Harris that I like to take, but this one you could be taking as a pure core if you feel so inclined. It's the Tarlok one. Now I don't often run my third Harris. Now I've spoken about the Garki and the Protoss being my second. One of the Harris options, I don't run it as a Tarlok very often unless there's the option where I'm not running the Rindak in that Harris. in which case I might take the Tarlock, but again, I don't really need the jungle. I prefer keeping it as Morat just because it's cleaner. But if you really want jungle, then obviously take it as a Tarlock. I generally put a Suryat, a Dartok Hacker, and generally a Morat Vanguard Infantry Paramedic in here, or the Rindak, depending on points and what I'm trying to achieve with that. So that's my options, either as a Tarlock, and then given the flexibility, so I can only take the Rindak. You can't take the Rindak in a Tarlock Fireteam. That then has to be another Morat Fireteam. So I'm potentially most of the time running a 5-man pure Morat Fireteam, a Harris Morat Fireteam, and then an Osnat or Gaki Praetor Harris Fireteam elsewhere. So those are the Fireteams. And then I've got some spare parts. So generally the spare is made up by some, what are they called? They are repeaters. They're great. I hate them when I'm playing against them. They are, no, this is looking so bad. That's what they are. There. And then I also put a Dadarazi in there for extra smoke and cover, and then sometimes like a flash pulse bot if I need to. But that's generally my list building. Often I'm bringing 17 regular orders into a game as a result of all of that. Obviously with the Strategos, I'm holding back your units, so that's pretty good. And I generally feel like, regardless of whatever the mission is, I've got the paramedics, I've got the hackers, I've got some heavy hitters, I've got some ARO pieces. I feel like with most of my Morats list, it's not really wanting for anything. If you're playing Morats, jump in the comments, let me know what you feel like Morats miss. Because in summary, I feel like the Morats are pretty powerful. I'm actually surprised that since their re-release, we haven't seen a ton more of them. I remember seeing some stats from an Australian tournament, and there were a couple of people playing them. And they, they didn't definitely like win. They're still, obviously, it's not just what you take that wins you tournaments. But I feel like Morat's got great firepower options. They've got excellent CC. They've got good hackers. I mean, the Dartok didn't make this list purely because I've got to keep this to within a reasonable time. But that's actually not a bad hacker for the points. And again, especially if you're putting it with a Suryat in like a Harris, then you've got the Tinbot and a hacker, which is actually pretty cool. We've got smoke and MSV2 combinations and MSV1. So as I've said, Anyat, the Dadarazi, the Osnat are just 3 things in my list that I take that have smoke. Most of those are shooting burst too, and then I've got MSV2 and MSV1 to try and make the most of that. So it's very easy to create those horrible engagements that no one wants, which is amazing fun. They have, warbands, Garkis and Praetors. I'm taking them as an order pool, but if the Osnat gets taken out, they're just running up and they're suiciding in, and even if the Osnat doesn't die, generally by turn 2 or turn 3, if I need something to quickly get up the board, most of it's clear, and I need something to die, I'm sending the Osnat, the Garkis and the Praetor because they've got 6-inch move on their first move. I believe the Osnat and the the Gakis and the Praetors have 6-6, I believe, and then the Osnat is the only one that slows them down with, I think, a 6-4, maybe a 6-2. I think a 6-4. It's the Kaitok that has 6-2. And then we've got Veteran, which is so forgiving if things turn to custard. If Core Knight does die, if a whole bunch of other things do die, it's actually not that bad. You can still continue and play as per usual, which is going to be very frustrating for an opponent that feels like they've pierced your core, like, impenetrable Morat's defensive line, and then takes out your lieutenant and then realizes actually hasn't done a whole heap. The only downside is that the Garkis and the Praetors don't have Veteran, and so expect them to just go mental if the Kornak does die. But that's not that bad, because again, that's their secondary role, is to go nuts and suicide across the board. I was going to mention something else. The strong Fireteam options are crazy. You've got some cheap options there, but you've got a ton of orders that you can bring. Difficult to counter through conventional means. What I mean by that is that a lot of the things that I at least would typically put in front of an army that's got, I don't know, Veteran, heavy infantry, fast moving units, they're just not going to have the same effect on Morats as they would with another army. So I'm really keen to get your thoughts on the Morats. Have you played against them? What did you find surprised you? What did you like seeing them played? What did you not like about facing them? Are you a Morats player and you've discovered something new in this video that you didn't realize about them? Have you got some insights that you'd like to share about some combinations that maybe I haven't discussed, like the Dedarazi Fireteam options, which I just haven't played because I found my favorites, and I'm sure they're perfect, but they're just not necessarily for me. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts. I'm loving playing Morats. I'm almost at the end of my time playing Morats as I move on to another faction, but not before I do a weaknesses of Morats video coming soon. So Like and subscribe if you do want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, I do appreciate it, and I'll be back soon with more videos.